I'm Brian Scordato, and this is the Idea to Startup podcast brought to you by Tacklebox. We accelerate ideas into real companies through the Tacklebox membership, and we think through startup strategy every Wednesday on the Idea to Startup podcast. You're here because you're thinking about an idea, or you're ready to launch something, or you already launched something and you're running full steam ahead. We're here to help with the counterintuitive stuff. On to it. Today, we're going to talk about idiots. We're going to get back to our series on AI for parenting soon. It's heating up. We've got a wedge product humming and emails coming in, and if you haven't listened, that's what the last couple of episodes are on. But it's early January. Lots of people are signing up for Tacklebox. Code much ado about stuffing still works for another week if you want 20% off. And I want to kick off the year by answering my absolute favorite genre of listener email: passive aggressive. After the Q&A episode a month or so ago, I got an email that said, quote, "I know you won't actually do this, but it'd be great if you did an episode on how you would start a company in 2025 if you were absolutely forced to." Well, Derek, looks like you're wrong. Despite basically every episode implicitly being how I'd start a startup if I had to, we're going to explicitly do it today. And I just realized that maybe Derek meant I wouldn't start a company in 2025 because I didn't need to, not that I was scared to for some reason. If that's the case, my sincere apologies, Derek. Anyway, I think it's a good prompt for an episode, because if you're listening to this podcast, I can almost guarantee you that one of your resolutions or goals or promises to yourself for 2025 has been startup related. I know this for sure for some of you, as January 5th, the Sunday before everyone went back to work, was our biggest Tacklebox application day ever. If this is you, let's set you up for success. If I do an episode in January next year titled How I'd Start a Startup in 2026, let's make sure you're too busy with the business you started this year to listen to it. Back to the question. Derek said if I was forced to start a company in 2025, what would I do? The answer is simple: set my life up in a way that I couldn't not start a startup in 2025. Since I didn't start a startup in 2024, that means my life isn't currently constructed to start one in 2025. I'll need a serious shift in both strategy and levers that enforce that strategy if I'd like to start a business. My daily life will need to look drastically different. And as I said in the opening line, that strategy is almost exclusively about idiots. It'll make more sense soon. So here are the 4 things I'd do: 2 strategies and 2 levers to enforce those strategies if I needed to get a startup up and running in 2025. We'll get into them after a quick note on idiots. A note on us beloved idiots. When I look at why so many startups fail, I really do think it's because people are idiots. Both the people trying to start the startup and the people those startups are trying to sell to. And to be clear, I use the term idiot in the most endearing way possible. I absolutely love us idiots. Because being an idiot isn't my fault or your fault, it's just our nature. We're hardwired to be irrational, to make decisions that aren't in our best interest, even when we know they aren't in our best interest, and we very clearly know what decision would be in our best interest. Here is an example. You know and I know that meditating each day for 20 minutes would change our lives. We'd be happier and calmer and more creative and probably live longer. Like 80% of successful people credit daily meditation with that success. Jerry Seinfeld says that 20 minutes of meditation each day was the single biggest driver in him creating Seinfeld. There are 72 20-minute blocks each day. If you point out that we're asleep for a third of those, great. There are still 48 20-minute blocks each day. Using just one of those 48 on meditation would be life-altering, and meditation isn't hard. You literally just sit there and do nothing. And yet, we don't do it, because we're idiots. Which is why I love startups so much. Because people think they're about AI or venture funding or MRR or a CTO or some other 3-letter acronym, but they're really just about people and all of our silly, irrational idiosyncrasies. Idiosyncrasies even sounds like idiot, and I'd imagine they share a Latin root or something, but I didn't look it up because I'm an idiot who knows the pod flows better if they're connected. Note, I just did, and they are connected. Idio refers to something or somebody that is so peculiar that it has little or no sense or reason. Perfect. So, to be successful, the first thing we need to acknowledge is that we're idiots. Our customers are idiots, and any assumption of rational acting on either of our parts is a waste of time. To be successful, we need to assume irrational behavior from ourselves and our customers, which means to build something they'll use, we need to study that irrational behavior. We won't be able to predict it, so we'll need to see it in action to understand the motivations behind it. When you start working on a business, you'll assume your customer is motivated by money. Eventually, you'll realize they're actually motivated by being cut by their seventh grade baseball team or by the LinkedIn posts of their college roommate's startup, which just announced a new fundraise, or by the dwindling amount of money in their bank account, which, when it runs out, means they'll have to go back to Deloitte with their tail between their legs and announce it on LinkedIn for all their friends to see. One of our most successful founders once asked me, while his business was doing millions and millions of dollars in revenue, if I thought his experience as CEO could get him into Harvard Business School the next year. When I laughed at what I clearly thought was a joke and said they'd be more likely to ask him to give a seminar and hire a few of their grads, he asked if I thought his parents would be allowed to attend that seminar, not picking up on my joke. They'd always dreamed of him going to Harvard Business School, he said, and maybe giving a seminar would be the next best thing. Idiots, all of us, in the best way. Back to starting a startup in 2025. If I were to start a business, the theme would be idiot-proofing the process, both internally and externally. And here is how I'd do it. Part 1. Actually make time for a startup. The first way I'm an idiot about anything new is assuming that I can just start doing it. I can wake up earlier or stay up later or be more efficient with the things I do now to create pockets of time to add something new. I've said this before on the pod, but it's worth repeating. We're all goldfish who have grown to the size of our bowl. Our lives are at capacity. Actually, they're over capacity. Adding something as substantial as a startup without removing something as substantial as a startup is just silly. This is going to be uncomfortable, but startups require sacrifices. Your new life is going to cost you your old one, and that's okay. It's a prerequisite. So, the first step of idiot proofing my startup strategy would be to make sure I actually had time to do it. The minimum for me is 7 hours a week. The reason I say 7 hours a week is that's the threshold for your subconscious to take it seriously. We want your mind working on this idea in the background all the time, which means you need to work on it every day to remind your subconscious that it is the top priority. So if you're doing 7 hours a week, 3 hours Saturday and 4 hours Sunday, and then 0 time during the week will be far less effective than an hour each morning because your subconscious will forget about your startup after a day without working on it. Startups are about momentum, and you can't get it with breaks. So we need to find you an hour a day. And I know what you just did. You thought, holy crap, I can just wake up an hour early. I don't need to remove anything. And guess what? I thought the same thing. We can't even go 3 minutes without us both proving the theory that we're idiots, huh? Because it's not just the hour, it's the mental space. Which brings us to exercise number 1 of making space, a life audit. Grab a couple of big pieces of paper and your calendar. On one piece of paper, write out absolutely everything you've spent time on in the past month or two. Put everything that's on your calendar and mark the rough amount of time you spent on it. Put anything that didn't make it on the calendar but you spent time on too. And if you're feeling particularly saucy, check the screen time on your phone. Write that down. Finally, put all the projects you'd like to have found time for but couldn't. Stuff that lives in your head, even if it hasn't escaped to your calendar just yet. Now, that piece of paper is our source of truth. What you spend time on is what you prioritize. I'd honestly recommend pausing the pod and taking 15 minutes to do this exercise because I think it's that helpful. Welcome back to anyone who actually did. So, how does it look? If an alien came down and saw this piece of paper that is the priorities of your life, what would they think you were working towards? If you keep doing the stuff on this piece of paper, where are you going to get in a few years? And on that thread, where do you want to get? What do you want? Tough to end up there if you don't know. The point here isn't to be hard on yourself. The contrary. The more garbage you spend time on now, the easier it'll be to find that hour for your startup. Everything on that page in front of you is a choice. Think about it like a gift from a past version of yourself that you can choose to accept or not. I'd imagine that nearly everything on that page is something you do solely because you did it the day before, and the week before, and the month before, and the year before. Life works like that. The tide takes us out a little further each day without us realizing, and one day we're out to sea. Now, jump back over to a blank piece of paper. Port over the stuff from your old life that you'd like to have in the new one. Leave the stuff out that doesn't serve you anymore. And I realize a lot of this stuff might not seem like it's a choice. You might have to do a certain thing for your job each day. But just try framing it as a choice. What if you didn't do it? Would you need a new job? Or more likely, could you figure out a way to get it off your plate without there being a big hubbub? Now, add your startup to the page and drive home the swap. What is it taking the place of? Write it out so you can see it. Quote, before, I spent an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours a day on X. I am not going to do that this year. I'm now spending that time working on my startup instead. For me, the swap would require me to drop something important to me, writing a book. I spend an hour plus a day each day on that, and I would have to stop. Adding a startup into your life will likely create some pain. You're going to have to stop doing something you like, and that is fine. Your old life is going to cost you your new one. If you aren't sure you want to start a startup, set it up as a sprint. For the next quarter, you'll do an hour of startup work a day. On March 31st, you'll pick your head up and you'll see if you're enjoying yourself. See if you'd like to swap it back. Now, I want to tack on one more quick exercise here. We made time for the startup, but I'd suggest making a budget for it too. To actually pursue your startup, you'll want to spend a bit of money on it. Not a ton, but a few $100 a month will go a long, long way, both for testing or development or coaching or community, but also for reinforcing your commitment. Behaviors drive mindset. The audit process here is the same. Grab your credit card bill to find the source of truth. Write down everything you spent money on and figure out what job it's doing for you. Create a swap. Make a budget of $200 or $600 or $800 by stopping spending money on one thing and starting to spend it on your startup. Simple, but really important. Remember, you're a goldfish. You're already the size of your tank. Remove to add. We'll get to idiot-proofing our startup life, step 2, planning for luck, after a little smooth jazz. If you've got a startup idea and a full-time job and want to test out the former before you leave the latter, come and work with us. Apply at gettacklebox.com. Over 400 startups have tested and built ideas through our program, and those businesses are now collectively worth over $1 billion. Our program helps you prioritize and execute, and our members and me and the team keep you accountable and give you feedback along the way. Come build with us at gettacklebox.com. Back to it. Part 2. Plan for luck. I recorded a full pod on luck a little while back, and I'll link to it. But I cannot have a podcast on what I'd do if I were starting a startup without at least a section on luck, because luck would be a huge part of my strategy. The idiot in me generally misunderstands what luck is. He thinks that luck is something that just happens out of the blue. There was a story floating around New York City when I first moved there about an actor who got his big break while a scene was being filmed in the West Village. As he walked by, the director jumped out from behind the camera and said, You're perfect. I need you in this shot." And the rest was history. That is what most of us think about as luck. Hopefully, it just happens to us. Except, as you probably figured out, that's not what actually happened to the actor. It turns out that first he moved to New York City because he lived in the Midwest and knew that was going to make his path to being an actor much harder. Then, once he got there, every Sunday he'd look up filming permits that had been filed for the upcoming week. These are apparently public. He'd then figure out what movies or shows were being filmed through some internet sleuthing and pick out something appropriate to wear. The movie where he got his, quote, break was set in the 50s, so he wore his most 50s style suit and a fedora. He would then go to the location and try to understand the scene and ask if they needed specific help. He'd then show up the next day and the next and ask the same question. On the day of his break, it turns out he'd first bought a pizza for the crew because craft services had been stuck in traffic, and then he was given a small part. You can't force the director to choose you, but you can make it way more likely that they do, which is what we call luck surface area. If I were starting a company in 2025, I'd recognize what type of luck I needed and dramatically increase my luck surface area to get it. This usually works well if you back into it. So, first, pretend you're doing a podcast interview in 5 years about your super successful company. When the interviewer asks, "What was your big break?" What is a plausible story for that? What could happen or who could you meet that might give you asymmetric upside? When something great has happened to you in the past, what was the lucky break that led to it? A huge driver of luck are relationships. Nearly every asymmetric leap in my career or life has been due to someone helping me make that leap. So, if I'm starting a business in an industry I don't already have a big network in, well, I sure need to create one. And I need to not act like an annoying, transparent leech while building that network, which means my luck approach would be to find a way to help the people I needed help from. There are lots of ways to do this. My favorite is through events that they'd actually want to attend. Another, possibly easier way is to find the things they hate to do but need to do and figure out how to make it easier for them. A Tacklebox founder trying to enter a new space spoke with a few people high up in this new industry and learned that they struggle getting a specific set of industry data each week. So this person started a newsletter that aggregated and presented that data. All the top people in the industry joined it because now they didn't have to aggregate it themselves, a thing they hated doing. And he struck up relationships. To wrap luck up, I'd make sure that of the 100 things that need to go right for a super lucky break, I'd orchestrated 99 of them. This takes planning and structure. I never want to have to rely on something lucky to happen just for me to have good luck. Part 3. Focus on one person and enormous value at a time. We've talked about how we, as founders, are idiots. Now, it's time to talk about how big of idiots your customers are going to be. Your customers won't act rationally. If you build something that can dramatically help their business or their life and show it to them, they probably won't buy it. If you offer it to them for free, they definitely won't take it. If they do take it, they won't use it. When you ask them if they used it, they'll say yes, even though they didn't. If they did actually use it and got some value, when you ask them to pay for it, they won't. Then, 6 months later, they'll email you asking if they can have that thing from 6 months before. Or maybe they won't. They're irrational. If I'm going to build a business in 2025, I simply cannot put up with all of that bullshit. I don't have the time, financial, or mental bandwidth for all the false starts. There's only one way businesses grow, and if I were starting a business, I'd make sure I was backing into it. Here it is. Your first customer has an extremely painful problem. They are trying desperately to solve it, but can't. You come along and solve it for them. This leads to a very successful outcome, one that's obvious and loud and easy to visualize and talk about. So your customer talks about it to other customers who have the same type of problem. And because the first customer was successful, a second customer gets jealous of that success and they buy your product too. Your first customer needs to take a leap. They've got to take a chance on you. The next customers just have to be envious of the first one. One reliable human trait is that we make decisions based on envy, not greed. So you have to help your first customer get out of a hole so that others can see this success and want you to help them get out of their hole too. Which means that startups only work when they find a customer in a hole that every other competing solution, for some reason or another, has missed or purposefully ignored. This is usually because the customer has specific traits that aren't worth building for. So maybe there are a bunch of digital legal solutions for restaurants. But for a local restaurant that's just bought a food truck and plans to use it for corporate events, none of those digital solutions work because of the mix of types of contracts or something. But this restaurant already bought the truck and they want to use it, so they're in a hole. They have no other viable choice and they have urgency to solve the problem. Then you step in. So if I were starting a company in 2025, I'd do it one customer at a time. Which is sort of obvious, but also not, because you're going to be tempted to focus on something that can scale early. And you'll want to use AI and all the other tools that are available to help you build something that can get really big really fast. But that is just your inner idiot talking. Pick one customer. Deliver an enormous amount of value to them by learning their idiosyncrasies. Then see if that value is so strong it attracts other customers. Or if you can take that value and find other customers with the same idiosyncrasies as the first. because that's the only playbook for a business that'll work. A customer segment is a group of people or businesses that share unique idiosyncrasies. Find them, and you'll have a business. Start with one customer at a time to do it. The depth of idiosyncrasy knowledge becomes your asymmetric information, becomes your moat, what you know that others don't that leads to a much higher quality product. And quality is what I'm after, and you should be too. Part 4: A system to keep you from being an idiot. All the stuff we've talked about is great, except for the fact that you and I are, as I've maybe mentioned, idiots. All the value in life comes from doing things other people won't. So, while our plan so far, the first 3 steps that we've outlined, are definitely things most other people won't do, we need a system to ensure that we actually do them. This has a number of levers for me. I've already built a system for this sort of thing, but if I didn't have one, here is what I would start with. First, a Sunday check-in that kept everything in order. And at that Sunday check-in, I would have 4 items. First, hooks. What hooks am I currently on? What am I nervous about that's coming up in the next 2 weeks that will increase my luck surface area or my access to potential customers and their idiosyncrasies? What have I promised to people that I need to deliver on? This could look like a million things: hosting a webinar for 20 target customers, or committing to sharing progress at an industry meetup, or anything. When you're doing something on the side, hooks are critical. It's easy to fall into habits of researching and emailing people and things that are relatively safe. But everyone performs better under pressure, so you've got to create it. Each week, I'd be sure there were things I was on the hook for, things I wasn't sure I could deliver and would have to push to figure out. Number 2, accountability. This is different than a hook. It's a way to ensure you're staying honest with yourself and, just as importantly, keeping others accountable. The second part might sound counterintuitive, but helping someone with their startup is often the best way to recognize the strategy you need for your own. Humans are terrible at introspection, but great at judgment. Specifically, I'd start with 3 people I send weekly updates to. One who knows the space I'm working in and can call BS on anything I'm not pulling directly from customers and tell me what I'm missing. One who's also working on a startup at a similar stage. And one who just wants me to succeed and will check that I'm not burning out. Probably my mom. Each week, they'll get a quick update: what I did, what I learned, what's next. The key is picking people who won't let you off the hook with vague updates or reasonable sounding excuses. And if you want these groups to be bigger or want the accountability to come from other means, great. Just make sure the accountability exists and you will get called if you don't show up. Number 3, coaching. The best athletes in the world have coaches. Not because those coaches are better athletes than them, but because someone who's done the thing before is helpful. I'd find someone who's helped other people like me go from 0 to 1 before, ideally in this industry. This might sound like a Tacklebox plug, and I guess it is, but it's also just why I built the company. This kind of knowledge and a consistent touch point is extremely helpful for a beginner. And coaches do some pushing. They can put you on hooks. This is a good thing. Number 4, the ratchet. Each week needs to move you forward in a way you can't easily reverse. Maybe it's telling 10 more people about what you're building. Maybe it's taking money from a customer. The point is to make reverting to your old life harder than pushing forward. This is the momentum you'll need because it gets tough building this new life. A system is designed to improve your worst days. We have a bunch of other system tricks. Email team@gettacklebox.com if you'd be interested in a workshop on setting the system up for yourself. But there's one more I've got to mention: transitions. When you work on stuff for an hour a day, you simply cannot have the first 15 to 20 minutes be you trying to figure out where you left off. So, at the end of each hour-long session, spend 2 minutes describing to future you exactly where you are and exactly how to start next time. 2 minutes will save you 15 minutes the next day, and it really adds up. Which brings us to the end, and the most important thing you'll need to do. The end. Enthusiasm. Way back in my brief venture days, I remember a pitch from an entrepreneur that didn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense. The guy left the room, and my boss, as he always did, looked at me and my colleague and asked what we thought. We both shook our heads no. The entrepreneur seemed great, but the business was really far away. We assumed our boss would quickly say the same thing and we move on to the next pitch, but he hesitated. The idea is a mess, he started, but man, enthusiasm is worth 10 points of slope. We were silent because we didn't really understand what he meant. He continued. When I asked what he'd done in the past month, did you hear the sheer number of things? He'd been to 3 conferences, run 25 on-site customer tests, pitched 50 companies, organized an industry fireside chat. I mean, you just cannot teach that type of enthusiasm. Enthusiasm, he would later tell us, is an amplifier. An endlessly enthusiastic person would add, in his words, 10 degrees of slope to their trajectory, meaning their progress would be steeper than their peers. People want to work with and for enthusiastic people. We root for enthusiastic people to succeed. We read books about enthusiastic people and pay to see people try to do really hard things. Everyone loves someone who's enthusiastic. Some people are naturally more enthusiastic than others, but I think it can be learned and improved upon. If you act like somebody who's enthusiastic enough times, eventually you're just going to be that. And that's it. My idiot-proof path to starting a business in 2025. First, make space for it. Second, increase your luck surface area. Third, solve for one customer's massive problem. And fourth, build a system to keep you moving forward. These types of things dramatically amplify all the work you'll do. And I'm confident that if I did them, I'd be in a great spot in 2025 to start a business. So take a stab at this stuff. And when the episode for starting a company in 2026 comes out, I hope you're in such a good place with this business that you don't need it, even if you're an idiot. This was the Idea to Startup podcast brought to you by Tacklebox. If you have a startup idea and a full-time job, head to gettacklebox.com and we'll help you build it. Code Much Ado About Stuffing will still get you 20% off your first month for a little bit longer. Have a great week.